Hey guys, it's Alex, and I'm here with my latest book review. I decided to film my next two book reviews out of order because the book I read before this was not a good read for me, and I was tired of being negative, so when this book was a positive read, I decided to talk about this one instead first. And that book is Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson. As you can see, there's no dust jacket for this book. I got it from the library, and there's no description anywhere on it, so I went in completely blind. I had no idea what it was about, other than that it was a thriller. The main character, Christine, wakes up one day, expecting to be in her early 20s, only to realize that she's a 47-year-old woman, asleep beside a man she doesn't know. That man introduces himself as her husband, and explains that this has been her life for the past 20 years. Christine has amnesia. She doesn't remember anything from the previous day, or even from her life in general. Even her childhood memories are very hazy, and she doesn't remember a lot about her past life, or her past friends, or her parents, or anything. She does get a few hazy memories from childhood, but absolutely nothing from adulthood, and nothing after the car accident Ben has told her has caused her memory loss. The book follows Christine as she seeks secret treatment without telling Ben, and tries to remember the events from her life and the previous days through a journal that she keeps. It's told in 3 parts. The first is one day. It's at the very beginning, about 50 pages, where Christine meets the doctor for the first time, again, after knowing him for several weeks or months, and he gives her a journal that she's been keeping for the past month. The middle part is the longest part of the novel, and that is the journal that starts in early November and goes through mid-December, and it stops just a week before Christine's current date. And then the final part is after she's read this journal, she tries to finally put together the pieces of her life. I really wound up enjoying this book. I loved the writing style and the character development. The writing style was one of those that it was just so lovely and nice and such a breath of fresh air that I honestly didn't notice it throughout the book, which is such a change from the books I've been reading. It was very easy and flowed very smoothly. The characters were all deep, they were all intriguing. I found them incredibly well-rounded. I don't really have much to say about them. I think they're above par for most thrillers, particularly the ones that I've read recently. I also found the plot very intriguing. I picked this book up not having high expectations because I've had a bit of a bad run with thrillers lately, and I didn't know anything going into this book. I read the first 50 pages without putting it down once. Even the second and third nights that I was reading it, I was falling asleep one night, so tired, out of my mind, and just drifting off and just no, I had to push forward. I had to figure out what was going on. I read about 40 pages that was just me desperately trying to stay awake long enough to at least finish the second part, and it was so compelling and scary in the strangest way, because even though this is a thriller, for most of the book, there are not very many scary things that happen. It's a quieter kind of scary, where Christine doesn't know what's going on. She feels a lot of the same emotions and a lot of the fears, and she doesn't know what is paranoia from her brain injury and what could potentially be a threat to her. It leaves you second-guessing pretty much every character in the book and everyone's motivations, including Christine's, and I was utterly intrigued the entire time. My biggest issue with this book was that it was about amnesia, and it centered almost entirely around amnesia, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I probably wouldn't have picked this up if I'd had read the description, just because I don't like stories that focus on amnesia. It winds up being very repetitive out of necessity because the main character is an amnesiac, and to me that always makes the story feel like it's dragging on. Even when it's done for stylistic purposes, it's never something I'm a very big fan of. I could definitely feel this book wearing a bit thin in that regard, especially towards the middle and end. Even though I was intrigued and liked the characters and wanted to find out what was happening, I did find myself a little bit bored and tired at times just because of the repetition and the way that she would have to relearn the same things over and over again sometimes. And that's why this book is rated a 3 stars instead of 4 stars, because I really did like the writing style and the character development. It's just the plot itself was not necessarily my favorite thing. 2 things I did really like that made this different from a lot of books and movies, I guess, about amnesia was that, first of all, her amnesia wasn't as cut and dry as it usually is. A lot of the times in movies and books, there's a specific cutoff between what the character remembers and what they don't, and it's always about that same line. or they remember absolutely nothing at all and nothing triggers anything. But in this book, it was a lot hazier as to what she could remember and what she couldn't. Sometimes she would wake up feeling 25, and she'd remember her best friend from college, or her father dying, or something about her son. And other times she would wake up and feel like a child and not remember anything. And it was very interesting how this sort of changed on a day-to-day basis. Not necessarily drastically. It was just what she could remember and what she couldn't kind of changed. And a lot of the memories that she did have were very fuzzy, and she'd have to be reminded of them. And I really liked the way that was done in this story. The other thing I really enjoyed was specifically to do with her journal. She does read her journal, and that's how she remembers a lot of things, and how she knows the doctor, and how she knows the people in her life. So each day, all she has to go on is her journal. And a lot of the time, her journal isn't 100% accurate, or it's very subjective, and what she reads in the journal is potentially a little bit different from real life. Not necessarily a lie, but at one point she made a comment about the doctor not needing to worry about his weight. One day she takes that phrase to mean that he's very, very skinny, and then she sees him, and she's very surprised and sort of like put off to find that he's not actually that skinny. He's very like sturdily built, and that her description led her to believe something different. And that happened several times, and I really did enjoy that. I felt like that gave the story a lot of depth. The one warning I have going into this, well, there is some mentions of domestic violence, but there was a lot of uncomfortable sex scenes as Christine sleeps in the same bed as her husband every night, and sometimes he pressures her into sex, and sometimes she's not saying no, but she's not saying yes either. That is addressed at a later point in the book, but I do want to give that warning if that's something that like you can't read or you don't want to read. That does happen quite a bit in this book. So just fair warning going in, that made me really uncomfortable. I probably would have given this 2 stars if it hadn't been addressed. But overall, I did give this book 3 stars. I really enjoyed reading it. And even more so, this left me incredibly excited to read the other S.J. Watson book that I have. It's called Second Life. I'm not entirely sure what it's about yet. I'm only a few pages in. But this book was really good. I just didn't like the story as much as I would have preferred. So I'm really hoping that Second Life is going to be a 4-star read for me. I would really recommend this book to anyone who likes slower thrillers or thrillers that have to do with amnesia. I thought it was really well written and the characters were great, so if the plot sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend that you check this out. Let me know down below if you've read this book and what you thought of it if you have. I always like to hear your guys' opinions. Bye!